Hello and welcome to the tutorial for July 19th for World Watercolor Month. The prompt is perform, and I did a sketch of a ballerina. I used multiple reference photos to create this. It's a rough sketch. Our painting is going to be very loose and rough. I left my lines extra dark so that you could see them, and if you want to take a screenshot, print it out and trace my sketch down onto your paper, that's fine. If you want to use some reference photos to try to create your own ballerina sketch, that's okay too. This one is a little more difficult because it is a person and people are hard, and so it took me a while to do this sketch, and I thought doing that online on the video for this particular tutorial would have been very lengthy. And so I will start off this video with saying that I do very few people. Every once in a while, off in the distance, I focus more on landscapes, illustrating objects and still life and flowers. So this is a little outside of my realm, but I thought it would be a good challenge. And so I think let's consider this more of a paint along or paint together versus a tutorial where I'm teaching, because I think that if you really wanted to learn how to paint people and ballerinas, I would not be the best person. But instead, we're going to paint along because we're working through prompts. And so let's start with our background. I always think that's easier. Go ahead, if you have had a chance, go ahead, screenshot, get this transferred onto your paper. And then, you can pause it right now. I'm giving you time to pause. And now I'm going to start painting. Okay, let's begin with the background. We're going to be using our raw sienna, quinacridone rose, some ultramarine, some burnt sienna, kind of these, and we'll probably warm some things up with a yellowy orange. I've got a little vermilion in here. So this is kind of the palette we're picking from. Okay, and I'm going to start with my size 6 brush for this background. Tuck that in. Okay, and for the background, I'm just going to do a kind of a muddled up bluey, gray, purple color by just mixing together from my palette these kind of dirty colors. If you don't have those on your palette, what you could do is a little raw sienna, a little French ultramarine to get a nice soft bluey back. Sometimes that gets a little green looking, but that's okay. It's like a warm gray green color. Okay, so now let's get that really nice and diluted because we want it to be super light. And for our background, most stages have curtains, so we're not going to paint in curtains specifically, but we're just going to make our strokes up and down so that we give kind of an illusion of that. I'm going to keep our background super light. If you want to, I'm going to lighten this up because I think it's so dark. The sketch is so dark that it's a little darker than I want it to be. I left it nice and dark so that it will be easy to screenshot this for anybody who wanted to use my drawing as the base of their painting. But now that we're going to start actually painting, I'm going to lighten it up. And so when we paint this background in, we're going to come close to the ballerina, but we're not actually going to touch her. So I'm going to start with my darkest, it's going to be a little darker here. And I'm just going to bring it down to this edge, and I'm just going to kind of swipe it up and down. I don't want it to be perfect. I'm going to add a little bit more water so that I'm a little more diluted by the time I get to the ballerina. Because if you can imagine, there might be a spotlight. I'm holding my brush towards the end to keep it in my hand very loose. So if she had a spotlight on her, we're not painting in a literal spotlight, but we're going to kind of give that illusion by having the space around her. And I'm keeping it super loose. Be very light. And then we're going to work up to a darker space from the edges. And I'm going to start here and work this way with my darker kind of bluey gray green color. And I'm just going up and down. I'm doing this really rough. I'm not using the tip of my brush. I'm using the side of my brush. And I'm going to add a little water in here to just draw this out and bring it nice and light where she is. And what we can do if your outsides aren't dark enough, I'm going to add a little bit more of this blue, which kind of makes things recede sometimes. Got this nice blue-gray color. Oh, I like that. Okay, I'm just going to kind of drop that in here a little bit just to make it a little interesting and just give this kind of cool background. There we go. Okay, now Oh, I really like the way that turned out. See how sometimes just some really simple brush strokes in watercolor do some very interesting things. You don't have to paint a curtain exactly as it would be. I don't even have a reference photo of a curtain. I just know that the folds go up and down and there's highlights and darkness. And so we just gave that illusion. Your brain fills in the rest. And so I think that's something that makes art really interesting, is how that works. Now I'm going to grab some of my burnt sienna over here in the corner. And I'm going to create kind of a stage floor with this. But what I'm going to do is pull some of my, ooh, there, that's perfect. I'm pulling in some French ultramarine, maybe a little more burnt sienna to warm it up a bit. So I'm using the same two colors essentially. Well, I used raw sienna and French ultramarine for the background, and for the stage I'm using burnt sienna and French ultramarine to develop this stage part. And where she's standing is going to be the lightest. So like if you had, yeah, we're going to make this a little darker, just develop a little bit of interest. Now I'm going to, there we go. I'm going to paint that just to give it some dimension and depth, right? And now for the very lightest part is where she's standing. And I'm going to start at the outside and start at the outside on here, right? And then we're going to just bring in, and if it bleeds together a little, that's okay. Like I touched the two together, that's fine. Now I'm going to use just water to bring it in close to her feet so that it's almost white around where her feet are. There we go. Okay. Whew, I love that. I'm really happy with that. I'm going to add a little bit more depth or darkness to the edge here because I really want to focus the idea that this is nice and light and she's under a spotlight. Again, we're not drawing a spotlight. We're not going to do a bunch of shadow work or anything like this. Our background is super soft. We're implying the idea rather than painting a literal translation. And so we're going to keep that in mind when we do our ballerina. You could wait for this to dry. You don't have to wait for this to dry. I'm not going to wait for it to dry. I'm going to grab my size, where is it? Size 4 round. It is very pointy at the end, so I can get a nice detailed, because it's so pointed at the end, I can get really fine detail work at the same time, but the body is a little bit bigger for a size 4, so I can also hold a lot of paint. This is still a little damp. We're going to work anyway. If we have some things bleed, we don't care. So our ballerina is going to have a beautiful blue tutu and leotard on. But we're going to start with her body. And so do you see how I have some from this earlier mix from our stage. I'm going to pull that into this quinacridone rose to make it a little pinker. We're going to keep her body super neutral. Let's see. So just a little bit of pink and a little bit, and if we need to pull in a bit more of that raw umber, we can. There we go. We just want it to be really soft. Okay, and so all I'm going to do is very, very carefully, I'm just going to, an illusion of a hand, it's just like the softest brush strokes, right? And here, and she's got her forearm and her upper arm. And it's just, I'm going so softly, I'm doing just a few brush strokes and then the leotard kind of comes on here. You see a little bit of her back. So I'm going to paint that in. This is like her shoulder area. I don't know, I've got like some, I don't know why I've got like a speck of something in there. I think it's a little bit of pigment that didn't mix in. All right, there we go. Now I'm going to do the same thing for her legs. I'm just going to come down and they're just going to be so soft. And I'm going to paint just the top of her foot, because the top of her foot is open. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Just the top of her foot, paint her calf and her upper thigh here. That's it. Now, in order to give a little shadow, because she does have a little shadow, I'm going to use some blue, and we're going to touch a little shadow here and a little up here, and her hand is in shadow here. And you're like, why are you using blue? Why wouldn't you use dark brown? Because the blue just contrasts really well. We're going to use blue on her tutu, and it's just going to blend in well. Okay, and a little bit here and a little bit here. And the same thing is true. I'm going to use, and I'm kind of mixing in a bit of the skin tone into the blue so that it's a little grayed out. But often, like especially if you're on a stage, you have these kind of dark casts, shadows on you. And so we're going to do a little bit there and a little under her leg and a little there. Okay, that's it. So we've given her a little extra dimension. I'm going to tone this down because this is a little more blue than I wanted. Okay. Yep, it's kind of like right. Okay, we're just gonna leave that there. This is actually pretty dark right here. Okay. Now, we can't see her face in this because her hair is here. But you know what? You might be able to see just a hint. So let's just bring like the slightest touch. See how there's just a slightest touch, just an indication with the tip of my brush that her face is there. Now we're going to draw the leotard and tutu. The leotard is darker than the actual tulle that creates a tutu. I'm going to go back to my French ultramarine. That's really dark. We're going to mute that down a little bit with just a touch of burnt sienna. Just a touch, just to give it a little grayed out, little bit of grayed out. All right, let's go like that. Oops. I don't want to add too much, so I'm just barely touching at my color. There we go. Okay, that's good. Every time I think I have it good, I go to, okay, because I want this part of the leotard to be a little more intense. I want to give some depth to it. Okay, I think we're going to start here and we can always make it darker. It's easy to go darker. It's not easy to go lighter. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just paint that in. Okay, and we're going to take that same color, but we're going to really dilute it, and we're just going to kind of make these strokes that are quick. You see, I'm not filling in exactly, I'm leaving a lot of white paint. I'm just kind of pushing the brush, and I'm not using the tip of my brush to make a fine, I'm almost dry brushing over the top, so I'm using a lot of the side of my brush to make this kind of texture-y. And if you want to practice this on another little piece of paper before you take it to your ballerina, that works. And I'm going to focus more of it and less up here and a little more here because we've got some shadows. There we go. Okay, now what we're going to do is use our more intense, darker blue. I'm going to add a little bit of this, oop, that's too much, so let me pop that up here. Okay, I'm going to pull a little bit of that in, and I'm going to pull in more of my, there we go, a little more. You see how we're developing the color there? And I'm going to, it's going to be darker underneath of here. So I'm just going to develop a little bit of depth. I'm just dancing my brush around. It's a little darker here. And a little darker under here. Okay. And maybe a little bit here. Do you see how that just gives us a little, it makes it look like it's layered. Before, we don't want this to look flat. There's all of these layers of tulle and they're gathered very tightly and pleated and stuff. And so this just helps to develop that. All right, I'm going to leave that alone. Now, her body is going to be a little shadowed here. So I'm going to add a little bit more blue, a little darker blue, because we want to make sure that our paintings always have enough contrast. Otherwise, they're really boring. When paintings are flat, to me, flat paintings that don't have highlights, and I really like value, good highlights and good deep shadows. So I'm going to mix in a nice dark blue, and we're just going to add in here, in here. Now that's really dark, and we're going to soften that up by, there we go, diluting it a little there. Okay, and we've got kind of like a strap there. All right. Oh, I really like that. And I'm going to take this really dark color, and I'm just going to apply, like this is the darkest part of her tutu. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of darkness there. And then it's a little darker right back here. Okay. Oh, I really am happy with that. Do you see how we're repeating all of the same colors? We're really pulling from the same things for each of these components. And so it makes for a very harmonious painting. I'm not pulling from a bunch of different blues. I'm mixing that burnt sienna, raw sienna, French ultramarine, a little bit of quinacridone rose, and that's developing our whole painting. And so when we look at it, it just has this overall really soft and kind of really nice feel. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I do have to work in some shoes because that's a really important part of ballerina. So I've got this rose color. I think that's on screen, right? And I'm just going to push it over here because it's not a bright pink, right? And I'm just going to take this, and all I'm going to do is with one little brush smart, I'm going to swoop here. Well, maybe more than one. I need a little more water. That's why that didn't. There. Okay, we're just going to swoop and swoop. That's it. I think I think right underneath of her thigh, let's get a little more of this. I'm using a little more burnt sienna and I'm mixing it into my lighter, so I'm trying to gray it out, right? Oh, maybe I'll mix some of that in. Okay, so I'm just kind of pulling everything together to get this nice shadowy color, and I just want to go right in here and darken that up a little bit because it is a little darker there, and it's a little darker here. Okay, and it's a little darker where her other finger is. Okay, that's it. Now she has really dark hair, so I'm going to pull out my raw sienna over here into my pile of dark blue to make a nice dark brown. I know, blue and brown make a darker brown, even though it's a really bright blue. Okay, so now I'm just going to hit in, I'm going to have enough water in my brush, but not too much because I don't want to create any water balloons. I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm just going to fill in that space where her hair is, but what you're going to see, because I want you to see that this is a bun to the back of her head, I'm just not going to quite touch that, right? I'm just going to kind of come, there we go, there's her hair. There, okay. And you can see that looks like a button. We're just letting the brain fill in all of the details that are missing. So thank you for painting this with me. This was fun. Something I don't usually do, so that was kind of exciting. And I think I'm pretty happy with that, considering that this is really not my specialty. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I will see you tomorrow. I think we're finally caught up for July 20th, because today is the 19th. All right, happy painting, and I'll see you tomorrow.